Yeah. Okay, hello guys. Last presentation. The topic is kind of boring, unfortunately, because it's going to be about documentation. So I hope no one is going to leave me. But before we get to the actual topic, I gotta ask. And there are two ways to go about it. I can ask who is not using Make or who is using Make. So I don't know, like it would be kind of a question of shame if I ask who is not using Make. So let's do who is using Make right now actively. Okay, great. So we just saved 5 minutes because I don't have to explain that we have lots of users, people love us, you know, we replace code with visual buttons and all that. It's a breakthrough, we are visual, we are all about power and everything is fast with us. And basically, if you don't know Make and you didn't get it from my first 4 slides, it's a Swiss Army knife for your automations, right? So if there is one image to remember from this deck, it's this one. You know, I had to convince our designer to build this for me. You know, it's like custom made. You know.
Did you bring it with you?
No, I don't have. It doesn't exist. You know, it's like it doesn't exist. It's just visual. So basically, with Make, you can build very simple automations like this, but it can grow bigger and it can go even bigger, right? And there are differences between simple and big, because if you go simple, you don't really need to document, to be honest. But if you go big and you have multiple of these, then it becomes a problem not to document. Okay? So, how not to drown? So, what is the actual problem, or what are the sub-problems which we are trying to solve? So let me again say what we are not solving. So if you have one organization with one scenario, 0 teams and 0 usage, that's not a problem, right? Like you don't really need to document. But if you have an organization with many teams and many scenarios and large consumption, then you should document, because if, for example, people leave you, then you may be in trouble if you don't document. Or if something breaks and the person who is managing those automations is not at work, maybe on vacation, then again, it's a problem and you can't fix it. So we are going to be focusing on these larger Make organizations and how to do things right. This presentation is based on a true story because do we have some partners in the audience? Agency partners, solution partners. Okay, so those who have not raised their hands, maybe you should know that we run partnership programs, and if you do No Code for Living, you can apply and we can become friends officially. You can get some perks from it. Yeah, but aside from the existence of the program, there are lots of processes after you hit this button, right? So there is a form, it needs to go to Salesforce, we need to do some vetting process, we need to talk to you, we need to schedule meetings, we need to send you a sandbox coupon, for example, if you become a partner, we need to send you a contract, etc., etc. So there is lots of small processes happening behind the scenes, which at the end of the day is like 50 or 40 scenarios, which somehow need to be managed, okay? So the challenges which we were facing, mostly it was me who was building these processes, but because I don't want to leave the company stranded when I'm not around, I started to think about the documenting of everything too late when I was done, and then I kept postponing, and then my boss is starting to ask me, hey, what happens if you leave? And I was like, yeah, you'll be, So that made me to start thinking about how to do it. And I was thinking for a long time, and eventually I'm going to show you the masterpiece of the whole thing. But basically the challenges which normally you face is that many people are building something, right? You have relations and dependencies between automations. So not only you build fancy scenarios, but they are also depending on each other. That's a problem. You also use some shared resources between the scenarios. So you can have like webhooks, you can have data stores, external databases, data structures used in many places. It's also frequently not clear which user is doing what, who is changing this and that. Was it automation? Was it real person? Was it in the interface? Was it through API? Like how? And then the last problem is that automations do changes, and it's not also clear which particular make execution did the change, because if something is not right, you may want to be able to click and go to that execution to see what went wrong. So let's see how we can address these problems. Okay, so when it comes to connections and personal versus team level automations, I should stress that when you build something for a company, when you build something for a department or for a team, you should not be using person level connections, right? It should not be like joedoe@company.com. It should be some admin account which has access to all the apps, because that account is going to live forever, even if your Joe Doe leaves the company, or Marie Antoine, what was the French name? Right? If the person leaves, you will still possess that automation account, and you will have no headaches with replacing it. On the other hand, we have make organizations who are running like team level or company level or department level automations, but also they enable their users to do their own automations, maybe something around calendars or syncing Google Sheets, etc. So for those, of course, we would recommend to have a separate team for each employee, because teams allow you to have separate connections for within that team, right? So it's like separate silos. So you can have people's teams where only one person would be present. And then for team level stuff or for company level stuff, you can have one team which will be running all those team accounts or admin accounts. Now, creating this automation user for the team level automations is gonna solve a lot of pain points, right? Like actions of these users are logged in the apps. Usually you can see that this particular admin at whatever did a change, right? It's gonna be in the interface. So you don't have to wonder whether Joe Doe, if you use him, did it through API or did it through interface. You know that this admin account is basically API only. You will also know that anytime something goes wrong, you don't have to beg for 2FA access. Right now, 2FA is a massive issue for everyone in this room, I assume. Like, if you start building projects and you don't have this admin account, you have to talk to the owner or to the boss, right? And then you have to exchange the codes from the authenticators and SMSs and hope that you did it fast enough so it doesn't expire and blah, blah, blah. So you will save lots of headaches on simply accessing stuff. And then I already said that the admin account is going to live forever. So if people come and go, they get fired or rehired, they go to different position. It doesn't matter, because you still have this admin account with you, and it's going to continue automating in Make. So again, very important, distinguish between team level and personal level automations. Is going to save you lots of headaches. Okay, now, for the problem where many people are building something, sometimes you will have maybe like 3 or 4 Make power users within a large company who are automating processes for the company. And people do different things, right? Nobody's gonna do exactly the same principles or exactly the same patterns. So you need to understand how people are building things. And to do that, you need documentation. So what is actually documentation? So I say it's the actual document, some like piece of text explaining how stuff is happening, but also it's small day-to-day behaviors, like what do you do? How do you name things? How do you move things around? How do you place it on scenario canvas, etc., right? This is essentially also documentation of what you build. So some things to consider. You should follow naming convention. I think this has been here a few times. I heard it like 3 times from Lilith only, and I attended like 3 sessions. So I assume it also was present at the other sessions. So you should name things, scenarios, data stores, data structures. It should follow some patterns. It doesn't matter what the pattern is, but there should be a pattern so people understand it. You can rename the modules in the apps, right? Or in the scenario. You can write notes within the scenarios. You should label your filters, even if they do nothing, right? You should just label them so you know what's happening. You can label your routes. You should, of course, write external documentation outside Make. We'll get there. And you can use also folders within Make or scenario properties in the enterprise plan, which I believe nobody has seen before here, or very few of you, so I'm going to show you. So for the stuff which I'm talking about, so renaming the scenarios like fail number 1, if you keep the default names of the scenarios, then you are set for failure from the first second since you start building. So you should, of course, rename the scenarios and all the other things, right? So again, labels here. You can rename the modules. You can add notes for important steps. Super easy, maybe super obvious, but people forget doing these things. Now, for the folders, you can, of course, put stuff into folders, or on the enterprise plan, we offer this view where you can switch scenario view to a table view, and you can also define custom columns up to you, basically, right? So you can say, hey, is this automation critical? Yes or no? Who is the owner? What is priority? Whatever. You can do these things as well. So, now, the most boring topic of them all, external documentation outside Make. So right now, Make doesn't really offer any fancy documentational capabilities, right? So the question is where you should write about the things you built. Is it supposed to be Confluence, Monday, ClickUp, Jira, Notion, Miro? I don't care, honestly, as long as you do it. If you use Notion, fine. If you use ClickUp, fine. If it's Jira, fine. But make sure you do it, right? The next question, should you document all the scenarios you built? Probably not. Like, if it's 2 steps, 3 steps, and when you open the scenario, it's so obvious you know what it's doing, you probably don't need to document that, right? Maybe you can mention it that this is doing this and that, but you don't have to go into the details because it will be an overkill. But there are important questions which your documentation should answer, right? It's like, why does the scenario process exist? What problem is it solving? Like, very often this basic question remains unanswered, and then you open a document and you don't know what it is for. Like, what's the deal? Like, why do I even care? Well, because it's not written there, you don't know, right? So don't forget it. Like, just first paragraph should explain why do you do that process or why you build that massive scenarios of yours. Then I also recommend to focus on tricky parts. So if the scenario is simple but has like 5 tricky parts, somewhere at the end, maybe you should just say, hey, and here at the end, you know, this is the tricky step. I always ask myself, if I open this, will I understand this step 2 months from now? If the answer is no, then I kind of try to describe it. Yeah, so that's how to identify them, the 2-month rule. You should also say who is the person responsible and who is the backup person if that person responsible is not around. You should also think about what are the first things to try if the scenario fails. And yes, 99% is restart. If it's not restart, maybe you can do some break error handling or resume or stuff like that, right? Another important topic, how to renew the connections in case of issues, right? Like if someone deletes by accident an API key, that's a massive problem in Make. So maybe you should document it, especially if that process of getting an API key is not that trivial. For example, in OpenAI, there used to be like 2 places where you could get API keys, and they were for different purpose. You would not believe how much time it took me to get the right API key so I could use it in Make. Because again, it wasn't really documented anywhere on our site, so I had to do like trial and error. And of course, the documentation, if you are describing some higher level process of related scenarios, it should at least show like links to the scenarios, and it should mention the shared data objects which are there. So data stores, data structures, maybe you have hooks, etc. Then we have some like naming convention examples, right? So again, as long as there is a pattern and you're fine with it, okay. So for example, if it's a 3-step process consisting of 3 scenarios, I do like 1, 2, 3. Then I describe what's happening, right? Not rocket science, it's basic things. But then this is what matters, right? So let's say you have 50 related scenarios, and how do you visualize them? Well, so we create process maps. So yes, it looks like a scenario again, but the difference is that the colorful ones are actual scenarios, like one scenario, and the gray ones are simple steps done by humans, right? And then the process behind the tech partner program grows bigger and bigger and bigger until I have my Miro board fully loaded with all the little scenarios which are related. And the good thing about Miro is that you can link stuff. I know it's not like fancy looking, but hey, it works. I usually also put the shared objects into the node. So if there is a scenario with webhook or data store or whatever, I put it into the node. And now I know that when something fails, I can search, right? You can do Control F in Miro, and you can quickly find all the relationships which you don't see in Make at the moment, right? So these process maps for big scenarios or process diagrams are super useful, and I'm glad I spent like 8 hours on it, because now if something fails, people can come here, do Control F by the name of the scenario, for example, or by webhook, and they can find it. Okay, now for processing of individual scenarios. In case you like insist on documenting individual scenarios, can you do it in an automated fashion? That is the question. So obvious choice, right? You use make app to list teams, then list scenarios, and then you get the blueprints, which are the JSON files. So the next step is what? Well, you get the blueprint like a JSON, as I said, and you probably think that you just throw in OpenAI there, you run it through it, summarize, and then it fails and it's all bad and doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But I made a mistake. I wasn't using assistant here. And then when I was consulting with my colleagues, they told me that the assistant should be able to handle the blueprints to give you at least like a meaningful paragraph of what is happening. So if you don't do like basic prompts and you do blueprints, you do assistants, it should probably work. I say should because you should go home and test it yourself. I don't know, it should, right? Now, if you don't fancy AI, you can also parse the blueprints and maybe parse the important stuff from it, right? So this is a Confluence page, which we use. This is actually a scenario about partner training, which is providing data for the level 4 challenge, which I believe everyone did here and got a rating from me. And we basically parse, some timestamps. We parse the webhooks. We parse used modules. We also parse like data stores and Google Sheets, etc. But the good thing is that you can search through Confluence again. So if you are missing something, if you have a spreadsheet, then you can simply look for a spreadsheet ID, and it's going to give you all the related pages which talk about the spreadsheet. Again, you will get a picture much faster than going through Make and trying to figure out where the spreadsheet is used. Okay, so this is the shared stuff of the scenario, still one page in Confluence. And the final thing is logging. I think it is underestimated. So who knows what is this? Huh? Everyone knows, great. It's an execution URL, right? Besides you know what it is, it's actually very useful because if you don't know, you can construct it from the custom and system variables by putting scenario URL and logs together and execution ID. But then if you do changes in apps, or if you want to log it somewhere, then you can simply attach these execution URLs to the output of your work and store it whenever you are sending the information to. So this is a simple email, some like payment run of credit card charges. And if something didn't work here, we could quickly click and see what that scenario did and why it didn't work. So if you are creating something in Salesforce or in PyDrive or whatever, you can always attach this log URL for easy debugging. Of course, it's not going to persist forever. It's going to be there for 30 days or 60, but you have at least something clickable and you can quickly check. Okay, summary. So challenges, we define them. Many people building something. Use automation accounts. It's going to save your life eventually. And document, right? For relationships and dependencies between automations, use documentation and process maps. Same for shared objects. If it's not clear which user is doing what, again, automations accounts are gonna save your day because it's that user which you are using just for automations. And if it's not clear which automation did what, you can start storing scenario log URLs. Basic trips, not trips, long day, basic tricks. But I believe if you do at least like 3 things, which I mentioned today, you are gonna see a big progress when something fails and you need to debug it. And that's it. I went over time, sorry.